asked to talk about the carbon cost of construction, and I think it's great that this alliance has come together with heritage, design, and my speciality seems to have become green architecture, which means I've been interested in this area since I was a student. It means most of my professional life no one has had a clue what I'm talking about.
Just catching
but I hope that is changing, and I hope that the virtuous alliance of all these things brings us together. So this is a little bit of a teaching, but don't worry, it's not too heavy. How much carbon is at stake? Well, it's a colossal amount. We as part of the process, we forced the developers to do some carbon calculations on what is the carbon footprint, and they presented it in such a way to try and make it look small. But when I went through it and looked at the appendices and so forth, I came up with this figure of 187 million kilograms of carbon, which is a hell of a lot. What does it mean? Well, we worked out that it was equivalent to a continuous car journey in an average UK car of 430,000 years. Or if you like, to put it another way, an average UK car driving around the world, the whole way around the world, 33,000 times. So it is quite a lot of carbon. Okay, in fact, if you look at the whole of the UK, the carbon which buildings are responsible for is no less than 49%. It's a huge chunk. And I'm taking a figure from Letty there. Google them if you don't know them. Great source of information. But that includes the carbon used for running a building, for building a building, and the parts of transport, because a lot of heavy stuff comes down the motorways, and of mining and manufacture and so forth. So it's a lot of carbon. Does it matter? Well, I think we will all be aware that we're living in an era where, according to Antonio Guterres, our wonderful Secretary General of the UN at the moment, climate change is the defining issue of our age. And you can see here from the birth of Christ up until now, this is how carbon is rocketing. And those who have looked at the figures of the last year, this pink area is how far the sea temperature has rocketed up above any other recorded year in this last year. So I think if we're in any doubt, the Paris targets of 1.5, trying to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C, are completely out of the window. Anyone who says that they're aligned with Paris targets is greenwashing now. So we know that there's a big issue. This is why this matters. And so you may ask me, where is all this carbon then, John? And I think the way that we're thinking about it in the construction industry now, and I'm pleased to say that this is now very rapidly becoming mainstream from having been sort of not really understood at all, is that we look at the whole life carbon over 60 years of a building, and we divide it into two bits. The operational carbon, which is used day to day for the lights, the heating, the power, computers, whatever, and then the embodied carbon, which is the carbon which goes into the actual construction, the building itself. And these two circles represent a building, a typical residential building, medium rise, built to building regulation standards today, and this is a best practice building. And if you look at this one, this large chunk here is the operational carbon used for heating and running that building. So our current building regulations are still pretty relaxed, and quite a lot of, so this is looking at over 60 years, a bit of 21% of the carbon is in the build, and 67% is actually in the running of the building. But if we go to a best practice building, the carbon for running the building has gone down from 67% to only 23%, because the building is much better insulated. It needs much less heating. Some of the very low energy buildings, you can't quite heat them just with a cat on the sofa, but you get the idea.
Oh, you do. That's why you heat your building.
Absolutely, yes. We used to have a greyhound, sadly she's died. She has had above average body temperature, but all these little solar gains from people, etc. are positive, and meaning that the heating can come right down. But if we're using less energy for operating a building, then you can see that the amount of carbon proportionally in the bricks and mortar there goes up to a greater percentage. So that's that part there. So these other bits and pieces, just very quickly, the maintenance of the building, and then the construction and transport and so forth. We don't need to go into those. But if we look at the embodied carbon, so if we zoom in on this bit, that is very largely in the structure. If we look at the finishes, external works, services, these are only about a quarter. But the rest, the substructure and the superstructure and the facade, make up very much the lion's share of the building. And if we go back to our previous slide, the national grid, happily, is one of the little success stories at the moment. That is due to be decarbonised completely by 2035 on current trajectories. It's doing well. So what that means is that the operational carbon becomes much less significant, because we hope that wind turbines, sea turbines, solar panels will be providing that. So that means that the operational carbon is less significant, but the actual embodied carbon becomes much more significant. And as Mary was saying earlier, we're quoting the editor of the Architects Journal, who said the concrete and steel elephant in the room is this embodied carbon, because this huge chunk of stuff here, if this has become decarbonised, this becomes the thing which is not really being looked at properly. And although there's been a lot of campaigning work, a lot of progressive people in the architectural industry and the construction industry are looking at this now, there is still no legislation, no monitoring, no measurement of the embodied carbon at all. And this needs to change very, very rapidly. So I think the fact that with the Smallbrook Ringway campaign, we got the developer to produce these figures after a lot of lobbying means, you know, is a big step forward. So what are the materials that we're talking about with this embodied carbon? And I just want to take you on a whistle-stop tour that 40% of the world's materials which are mined and extracted go into construction. 75% of the world's timber goes into construction. Concrete is now the most plentiful element on the whole earth. It makes up more than half the mass of all the materials in the world, and all the materials, the sort of human-made materials in the world, now outweigh the whole kind of forests, trees, biomass, humanity is 0.1%. And that concrete use has tripled in the past 10 years. It now accounts for 8% of global CO2. Steel production, 50% of steel goes into construction. The UK, 62% of its waste comes from construction. This is farewell to the Access building, which was demolished earlier this year, building very much of this era. And a staggering 91% of our buildings in this country are demolished before the end of their serviceable life. Well, you may be horrified if these figures are new to you, and you may be thinking, well, what should be done about this? And some of you may be aware of the Marks and Spencer's builder in Oxford Street, where a big campaign has been fought last year, and a ruling was given by the Secretary of State this year. Are we acting as if there's a climate emergency? Well, no, we're not. The radical reductions in greenhouse gases which are required are precipitous like this. And so we really need to be looking at repurposing and reusing existing buildings. This is the Secretary of State's ruling on the Marks and Spencer's case. And alternatives must be looked at, must be properly considered, which give less harm. Now, in the sense of the Ringway Centre, I think we've got an alternative which Mike has showed you, and we know that it would give much less harm. What would it be in Smallbrook Ringway? Well, if we look at the fit out and services, and these, I'm afraid, with apologies to the Roberts family, are the horrendous images which the developer wanted presented in the press to show the vandalism which has taken place. But this is actually, if you look, if you take it, absolutely, it's totally superficial. It's the ceilings, the windows, the electrical wiring, all of which can easily be replaced. And as I've shown earlier, in fact, are only a little snippet of the carbon anyway. But the structure is absolutely rock solid, I'm sure.
Well, the Rotunda used to look like before it was turned into
absolutely.
It looked like an absolute mess.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the Bronx.
Totally. And so
That's how it
yeah. And so if we look then at the carbon figures, This is demolition and new build, and this is retrofit. And you can see that rather than here, we could be right down here, based on the developer's own figures, which we forced them to produce and extracted from them. Demolition and rebuilding would use 53% more embodied carbon than retrofit. So we cannot say today, ladies and gentlemen, that our councillors have voted in ignorance for this environmental catastrophe as well as for this heritage catastrophe. The figures are there. What's happening elsewhere? Birmingham is not ahead of the curve on this. In Sheffield, a big department store known as Cole Brothers, going right back to this same sort of era, was tendered to 6 different property developers. Arup having done a study which shows that the retrofit would reduce carbon by 60%, and 6 good tenders came back from developers on the basis that we are keeping this building, full stop. What would you do with it? Urban Splash, the same developer as Rotunda, has won the competition. If you haven't seen Joe Hollyoak's column in Building Design about it, I suggest you look it up, and he makes telling comparisons with Birmingham. Similarly, still in Sheffield, Park Hill in Sheffield, which was recently named by the Sunday Times as, quote, the capital of cool, has retrofitted these amazing 60s flats in Park Hill, which again were slated for demolition and were hated, but have now become recognised as iconic pieces of Sheffield, and carbon reduction of 87% there on operational carbon. The Entopia building in Cambridge cuts carbon by 84%. In comparison, Smallbrook Ringway, the demolition and new build, increases carbon by 153% based on today's decision. But I don't want to end on that note, because the decision is simply a piece of paper, and I think there's a lot more that can happen. Will the West Midlands Combined Authority give funding support to this environmental and heritage catastrophe, or will they look at their own policies and say, actually, we don't want to support that, but we would support a creative repurposing? Mary and I have said to the developers today we're on to meet with them and look at what other possibilities there might be, and we know that it's far from game over, particularly because if heritage and housing, of which only 4.4% affordable housing is in the mix at the moment, and environmental issues come together, I think there's a very happy, virtuous sort of alliance, because the greenest building is the one that already exists. Thank you very much.